I call Catherine Delahunty.
Ngā koe, Mr Speaker, tēnā koutou katoa. I rise on behalf of the Green Party to speak in favour of these three bills and this process, with some humility as a Pākehā, acknowledging that none of our two members of caucus who whakapapa to these rohi, but just acknowledging the importance of us as Pākehā standing up for Te Tiriti o Waitangi and taking our place in recognising the important processes that we engage in this House and we engage in this country. Because if Pākehā are silent, and if we do not acknowledge the treaty process, we are pretending that that process belongs to Māori, but we are the main beneficiaries of the treaty. So I want to speak to that as well. The Green Party is supporting the first reading of these three bills, and we recognise and respect the blood, sweat and tears associated with getting to this point by the three iwi involved. Now, Ngati Wai or Maniapoto, this settlement bill for them will hopefully allow Maniapoto to uphold their sacred relationship to the Waipa Awa, ko au te awa, ko awa te au. And we recognise their generosity. We recognise that co-governance or co-management is actually a generous compromise by mana whenua. It is a gift back to the nation in saying that what was ours in entirety and will always be ours, we will also work through and share with you in terms of governance. And I think that the bills that we've seen in this House previously around Waikato to this regard are very important, and we will all be watching to see that they work in terms of the spirit of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So we must pay respect to those people, to Ngati and Maniapoto. Also would like to pay respects to Ngati Porou. I lived in the Tairāwhiti for 8 years, and you cannot live in that area without recognising the energy and power of Ngati Porou, but also the particular history. The history of economic deprivation through land court and land tenure machinations in the past. But there are some good opportunities in this bill and relationships which Ngati Porou will be able to take full advantage of. But when I worked in the Rohi for 8 years, I was deeply affected by whānau living landless with broken houses and the lack of opportunity for rangatahi and whānau katoa. And if you've seen the movie Ngati, it tells you a story about the previous vibrant economic sovereignty that has been undermined. And we need to see the rebuilding of that sovereignty through bills like this, particularly for the most poverty-stricken people and the most remote rural communities, which I saw as an advocate for the poorest of the poor. I'm hopeful that this is a start towards those most vulnerable people being the beneficiaries of this mahi. Thirdly, to Ngati Pahauwera, the Mohaka people. It's a terrible history of loss and of the way the Crown acted towards you. The lack of good faith in terms of the Mohaka River people is a story that all New Zealanders need to read. They need to understand what happened to you and what the journey has been to get to this point. And although I lived in Turanga, I travelled through your rohe, and I will never forget being on the hikoi, the Takutai Moana hikoi. And as we went through Ruponga, on the side of the road, the kohanga reo stood with a sign towards of us. All those little tamariki mokopuna standing there saying, kia kaha, kia kaha. And that was one of the most moving moments for us as part of the Takutai Moana hikoi, to see the people of Ruponga who actually stand up from the smallest to the kaumātua for what they believe in. So acknowledgements to you. The Green Party recognises with a heavy heart the histories behind the settlement process, and we actually reject the concept of full and final, even though we're supporting progress for these iwi. How can it be full and final settlement when every claim added together is less than the money used to bail out South Canterbury Finance Company? The degree of recompense the Crown actually gives compared to the losses does need to be analysed in the context of the instant bailout provisions for failed financiers who took advantage of the government guarantee. Is the poverty and loss to all these whānau over more than 150 years worth so little in comparison with the money the Crown is prepared to spend on businesses that have been greedy and at times misleading in their behaviour? And they only had to ask once. So although we celebrate the progress for these iwi, we have concerns about the scale of redress. It is not full and it's not final, no matter what political spin we place on it. We also, and I have to be brave here and say this, place on record some concerns about other iwi who are impacted by the Crown picking winners during settlement processes. And this is causing some pain and distress in the Tairawhiti because the Crown has decided to work with large natural groupings, and iwi like smaller people like Rua Waipu and Taitanga Hoati have been more than vocal in their claim of being marginalised. But the history of the Turanganui iwi and their relationships and boundaries is complex, and it's not the Green Party's business to address the issue of boundaries between tangata whenua. That is not our role in terms of the treaty relationship in Aotearoa. But we can say that the Crown process can create new grievance as well as make agreement. We can say that dialogue for justice must continue and justice must also be seen to be done. We wish the Crown to recognise that history is not fixed. Dialogue and negotiation is a permanent feature of te tiriti, and settlements need to be negotiated with no absolute requirement that the iwi involved must be silent in the future. Stories are still emerging about how land and resources were alienated, and issues such as the Takatai Moana sadly have the potential to create new claims. The government needs to accept that, like all significant relationships, everything has to be open for discussion in an honest and realistic manner. The next generation of Ngati Wai or Maniapoto, Ngati Porou and Ngati Pahauwera will have something to say to the Crown, and they should be listened to. And that something may be about fairness and justice, because they will do the maths and see that South Canterbury Finance gets instant redress while their whānau do not. One of the things I'd like to see alongside this bill, and I do applaud the work of all the people involved, is a budget for Pākehā education. Because having lived in the Tairawhiti, as long as Pākehā think the settlement process is to do with Māori, they ignore it in many cases. And we need them on board. We need my culture on board so that we do not undermine the very good work that people are doing to build a successful cultural and economic base for tangata whenua. So we really do need to get Pākehā educated, because they don't attend claims processes and they don't read settlements. And I can speak for my culture here, very few of us embrace the work that people in this House are doing or understand what the Attorney General is trying to lead here. And unless we actually go out there and proactively explain to Pākehā, they will be our barrier. And racism will be an issue. And I can speak on that because I lived in Gisborne. And in Gisborne, I didn't hear very many Pākehās embracing the settlements process. And that's an issue that we need to be brave enough as Pākehā to talk about alongside the work of tangata whenua. It's our responsibility, not Māori, to educate our own and bring them on board. But the Crown has a big role in that, because the Crown, since 1840, has had a big role in creating the essential necessity for this process. So without having much more to say, I acknowledge my ignorance about the detail. And I acknowledge that I'm speaking as a Pākehā, but that it's vital that we front up to these settlement processes and that we're brave enough to name our concerns. I would like to acknowledge all the people who've travelled here today to participate in the process. It's just the first reading. And I look forward to hearing more through the Select Committee process, and I look forward to the second and third readings, which it is undoubtedly likely we will be supporting. But I can never feel a great sense of celebration until everyone in Aotearoa stands up behind this and acknowledges that it's important and acknowledges that it's about all of us. I'd just like to say we must celebrate progress made with a level head and a willingness to acknowledge that the marginalised must be heard. It is not as tidy as saying it's full and final, but to say that it's over and done with may be tidy, but it's not honest. It's important that we are more truthful and say we're on a journey together in this nation. It's not a tidy journey, but without that honesty about our history and about the current grievances which we have potential to create in this very whare, we will not make peace and justice in our time or for tamariki mokopuna. And as a grandmother, I am responsible for looking ahead, as so many of you, for what will our mokopuna have to deal with it. So no full, no final, but absolutely let's acknowledge progress made. Kia ora tātou katoa.
Honourable Georgina Te Huhu.
E ngā uri o rātou mā kua riro ki tua o te pai. Ngati Porou, Ngati Pahauwera, Ngati Maniapoto, haere mai, nau mai ki tēnei te whare